So last week we looked at the first half of Pilate having to make his decision about who Jesus is and whether he's guilty of anything, whether he's deserving of death or not. And this week we get to see what his actual conclusion is. And all through this morning, one of the things we've been thinking is we have to make a similar decision ourselves. We have to make choices about who Jesus is, and those choices have to make a difference to our lives. We can't just say something about him and it make no difference to us. If we truly believe he is king, if we truly believe he is God, it has to change how we act, how we behave, and how we speak. And so this morning we're going to finish off looking at what Pilate decides, but in doing so as well, we've also got to think about what we decide and what difference it makes to us. Because it should make a difference. And to get us thinking about this, I'm going to start off by talking about one of my favorite pop, well, they're not really a pop group anymore. They're kind of an old group from the past. I love the Scottish group, the Proclaimers. They're probably most famous for their song 500 Miles, where it's been used in films and all over the place. But actually, they have more than that one song in their repertoire. And to be honest, most of their not very well-known songs are much more thoughtful and much more, they're better, actually, than their biggest hits. And quite often, their songs draw on themes of faith and how they are two brothers who have been searching for answers for years. And you can see it in all of their songs. And reflecting their search for truth, their search for God, one of their songs contains these lyrics talking about the passage of time and about their level of uncertainty about whether God exists or not. And they say this, one more down, some more to go, then I'll know or I won't know. If all the songs I hear you sing are everything or anything. And as we move into this second half of Pilate looking at the life of Jesus, it's all coming towards a climax. He's having to make the same kind of decision about Jesus. Is he everything or is he nothing at all? Is he everything or is he of absolutely no consequence? And actually the Bible and every account of Jesus is trying to make us make the same kind of decision. It's confronting us with the same thing. Is he everything or is he anything? Is he everything and so he should change my life, or is he just of no consequence at all? So as John ends his book, one of the things he says there is that Jesus did many other things, but these are written down so that you may believe, and by believing have life in his name. He's trying to draw us to a conclusion about what we think about Jesus Christ. Mark's gospel begins with this really provocative line, the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then he tries to convince us that Jesus is the Christ and is the Son of God. And if he is, that's got to make a difference to how we live. We have to choose how we're going to respond to him. Jesus himself in the Gospels at various times asks the question, who do people say that I am? Who do people say that I am? And when the answers come back in their varied forms, he always makes it personal. He always takes it to and what about you? Who do you say I am? And today, we're going to see a man making his decision about who Jesus is. And we're going to see the impact that choice has upon him. And that man is Pilate, who we looked at last week. And last week we had the first half of his story, and it kind of left it on a bit of a cliffhanger, but you all know how the cliffhanger plays out anyway, so I don't quite know why I did that. But we're now going to see the second half. He's got to adjudicate on whether Jesus is guilty of anything and worthy of death. Last week we saw he's convinced Jesus is innocent. He's convinced of that. But the question is he going to act on his conviction, or is he going to do what works for him? Is Jesus going to be everything to him, or not really anything at all? And it's all going to, in the end, crystallize around one question. And when we looked at verse 12, when Derek read that, this is where it's all going to hinge. This is where his decision's going to lie. Because in verse 12, you get the Jewish leaders coming up to him and shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar." If you let him go, you are no friend of Caesar. Those words, as we'll see, are used to box him in. He's got to make a decision. Is Jesus everything or anything? Is he everything or is he nothing? So, before we jump to this, let's look at remind ourselves of some of the things that John's Gospel has taught us over the months that we've been looking at it. So from the very start, in John chapter 1, one of the big things that it says there is, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son who is in the closest relationship with him has made him known. The claim about Jesus there is, he is God and he shows us what God is like. And as we think about that, we see a God who is gracious, a God who is compassionate, a God who cares for us, a God who could have avoided this moment. Jesus could have avoided it. So he said things like this, "No one takes my life from me, I lay it down of my own accord." In the previous chapter, when he's going to be arrested, it says he knew everything that was going to happen to him, and he still lets it happen. So, now we're starting to see some of those things that he knew was going to happen to him play out. And if you look at the start of the reading, he's been flogged. Jesus is flogged. That means his clothing is removed and he would be whipped again and again and again on his flesh. He's had a crown of thorns placed on his head. He's dressed up and he's mocked. He's punched over and over and over again. And this is just in private. This is just before Pilate and his guards. My question would be, why would he let himself go through that? If he really is God, why would he let himself have that happen to him? And maybe we'll just leave that question hanging in the air for a moment. He's then brought out. He's brought out before the crowds again. And as cruel as this moment is, this is actually Pilate trying to release him. Because he's thinking, I'll mock him, I'll humiliate him, and maybe the crowd will be pacified by that. Maybe they'll think, he's had enough now, let's just let him go, he's learned his lesson. So he brings him out, and before the crowds he says, here is the man, which might seem like a little throwaway line for us. But for Jesus, those words are going to resonate. They're going to resonate with him. Because when God picked the first king of Israel, when Samuel goes and sees him, God whispers in his ears, here is the man. It's almost like he's being announced king by Pilate without Pilate even realizing it. Pilate is trying to let him go. But the crowds, they just want Jesus dead still. So they shout, we have a law that says, because he said he's the Son of God, he needs to die. And in response to this, we get to see the dilemma Pilate is in. He wants to release Jesus. He wants to. He's found no good reason to execute him. He's found no charge that sticks. But then he's just heard this. And when you look at verse 8, there's something really, really interesting. It says, hearing Jesus is the Son of God, he was even more afraid. So all through this, under all of his bravado, under all his power, he feels there's something different about Jesus. He's wrestling with the question of who he is. He's more afraid by this. He was already afraid. He was already thinking there's something different about this guy. He knows Jesus is significant. One of the other Gospels has that Pilate's wife sends him a message to say, have nothing to do with this man. You get this real sense that he's in the middle of a pivotal moment in his life. Is Jesus going to be everything or is he going to be nothing? It's almost like his entire life and his destiny is going to hinge on what he concludes about Jesus. So he takes Jesus back inside and he asks him, "Where are you from?" And this is not a geographical question. This is him saying, "Who are you really? Who are you really?" And he gets no answer. And that's not because Jesus doesn't want to tell him, it's because he's already told him. He's already told him everything. He's a king, and his kingdom is like nothing else on earth. They have one last interaction where Pilate says, "Why don't you answer me? Don't you realize I have power to free you or crucify you?" And Jesus coolly responds to him, "You'd have no power were it not given to you from above." At this point, Pilate has actually reached his verdict. He's convinced that Jesus has done nothing worthy of death. He knows something, but he doesn't act on it. He has a verdict that he knows and a verdict that he shows, and the two things are very, very different. What he does is more important than what he thinks at this moment. So when we look at verse 12, we can see that it says this: Pilate tries to set him free. In fact, he tries to set him free over and over again. He keeps trying to release Jesus. But there's a really important word in that sentence, and it's the word "but." He wants to let him go. He could do it. He's got the power to do it, but he doesn't do it. And the reason he doesn't do it is that people keep shouting at him. His verdict about Jesus is, "I think there's something special about him, but it's not going to change my life. I think he might be all that he claims to be, but I'm not going to change because of it." And that's the challenge for us in this. What are we convinced of about Jesus? What difference does it make to us? It doesn't make any difference to Pilate and how he chooses to live his life. The question then comes for us: what about us? What about you? What about me? Pilate had a weak spot that meant that he couldn't do what he knew was right. And his weak spot was his ambitions. He was vulnerable. He'd reached a position in life where he was climbing the pole, and he wanted to protect that. He wanted to protect it at all costs. In fact, he was scared of losing it. He'd got his position because of a friend, and his friend was someone who was known as a friend of Caesar. It was actually an official title that you could get. But his friend, who was a friend of Caesar, lost that. And because he lost that title, he was then seen as an enemy of Caesar, and he was executed. Pilate wants to keep that reputation of being a friend of Caesar. I mean, I bet in the United States right now, there are people who want to be known as friend of Trump, aren't there? I bet there are. I bet more so in Russia, there are people who want to be known as friends of Putin. You wouldn't want to not be his friend, would you? Pilate's patron lost that honor. He lost that role. And if you're not his friend, you're his enemy. And so Pilate is thinking, "Oh, I've got to protect myself." So when the crowds shout out at him, "If you let him go, you're no friend of Caesar," that's not just saying you're not someone that likes him. It's saying, actually, your entire life is going to change. They're effectively saying, if you let him go, we're going to grass you up and you're going to lose everything. And that was it for Pilate. That's what made him make his choice. He couldn't risk losing everything to let Jesus go. He knew, or he suspected, there was something special about him, but it lost out to, "I'll do whatever works for me." That's the kind of thing we need to grapple with as well. If you were at Sizewell this year, Sachi, our speaker, mentioned a song by Bob Dylan called "You've Got to Serve Somebody." You've got to serve somebody. And that drives home to us, that song, that all of us, whether we recognize it or not, live for someone or live for something. There's something that directs our lives. What you might not know is that another songwriter, John Lennon, was angered by Bob Dylan's song, "You've Got to Serve Someone," and he wrote the song, "Serve Yourself." Actually, they're both saying the same thing. You've got to serve something. You're either going to look after your ambitions or you're going to follow someone else. Pilate has managed to do both things at the same time. He's serving his ambition and he's serving himself. And Jesus is collateral damage to protecting his life. His dilemma was ultimately this: if I release Jesus, I lose everything. If I release him, my life has to change. He makes his choice. For him, Jesus is not everything. He's something, but it amounts to nothing. Question now for us is this: who is Jesus to you? Who is Jesus to you? Before you answer that, though, let's take a moment to think about another choice that is in play here. Because Jesus has said no one takes his life from him, he lays it down. He's choosing to do something here as well. So what's Jesus choosing right now? Well, we can look at the reading and we can say he's choosing injustice. He's choosing abuse. He's choosing mockery. He's choosing disrespect. He's allowing all of these things to happen to him. But then we can also layer on top of this, he's choosing to lay his life down for us. He's taking upon himself our sin. He's taking our guilt onto him. He's, in the words of a previous chapter, drinking the cup his Father has prepared for him. He's sacrificing himself for us. Why does he do that? Because that's what God's like. God saves. Jesus has come to save his friends. There's a verse in one of John's letters that says this: God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. He chooses this for us. In the last couple of weeks, I found a TV show on Netflix called The Innocence Files. And what this show does is it documents the work of an organization in the United States called the Innocence Project, and they advocate for people who have got life sentences, who are on death row, who have claimed the whole time that they are innocent. Now, as we all know, everyone in prison claims that they're innocent, but these people actually are. And watching these cases unfold, you see stories of people who were arrested because they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. One teenage boy was walking to the shops to buy some food for his mum, and a victim of a rape saw him and thought, that's the guy. And because of that, he was arrested and ended up being in prison for life. Another person, he was driving a car which happened to have a number plate that was similar to one involved in a murder. And all of these people, when you watch these investigations, you see that the authorities were less concerned with following all the lines of investigation, at best, to sometimes being downright corrupt. And you see how the investigations played out, how there was coercion, how people were imprisoned for things they did not do. And then you get to see the evidence retested. And you see DNA proving that it wasn't the person. You see how sometimes they had suppressed evidence that proved innocence so that the defense could never use it. And then you got to see people being set free. And some of them had been in prison for over 3 decades. They'd lost most of their lives. They hadn't been able to go to their parents' funerals. Their dreams and their ambitions of who they might be had been shattered. And you watch it, and the moment that the innocent people go free, you think, good. You think, good. And then when you hear about how the guilty person has then been caught and punished for their crime, you think, good. It's deeply, deeply moving to watch. Jesus deserved something like that project to work on his behalf. But he chooses for it not to happen that way. Easter says to us this. Jesus effectively says to us, because in this story we're the guilty ones, you are guilty, but I will be guilty for you. You deserve God to cast you out, but I'll be cast out for you. You deserve to face the consequences for all the stuff that you've done wrong. I'll face those consequences. He says, I will face them on your behalf. Your death will be my death. My freedom will become your freedom. The hell you deserve will be the hell I experience on the cross. My innocence will become your innocence. My family will become your family. That is who God is. If we were to circle back to Pilate, he was shaken by the question, or by the statement, you're no friend of Caesar if you do this. One of our questions might need to be today, who do you want to be friends with? Who do you want to be friends with? Pilate wanted to protect everything that he had, and Jesus, he just let him go. He was convinced that Jesus was innocent, but he couldn't do it. He chose to serve his ambition, and he did not change his life. He was faced with that question, is Jesus everything? Is Jesus everything? And he concluded, perhaps more scarily than Jesus is nothing, he concluded Jesus was something, but it wasn't enough to make a difference to him. He couldn't reshape his life. He couldn't change his actions. He wouldn't change his words. Question for us is, what about you? What about me? If we believe Jesus is everything, if we believe he's taken our guilt upon himself, we should be different. We should change. Where we know things are wrong in our lives, we should seek to make them different. We should ask forgiveness and ask for help. So I'd encourage you, think about that question. Is Jesus everything to you? And then think about where you might need to put that into practice. And I'd encourage you, if something's come to mind, pray with someone about it. We've got a prayer team who are available after the service. They would be delighted to pray with you. So if right now you're thinking, I know Jesus is everything, but I do this, pray with someone. Because you have a God who wants to hear that prayer and wants to help you work through it. Let's pray. Father, we would ask this morning that we might be challenged by that thought, that Jesus needs to be everything to us. And if he is everything, if he is the most important person, that does make a difference. It has implications for how we live and how we speak and how we act and how we treat other people. So we would ask this morning that if you have placed your finger on something in our lives that needs to change, that we would have the courage to admit that to you. And that if you've placed your finger on convincing us that Jesus should be everything to us, help us to live like he is. If you've convinced us that he is something, help us to be braver than Pilate was and to work it through and to ask you for help. But above all, may each one of us be inspired and touched by the thought that this is how God saves us. He steps into history to die for the unworthy, to make them part of his family. Help us to trust you, Jesus. Help us to trust you more and to live for you. And we ask this in your precious name. Amen.